Could you tell us a bit about what it was like raising a family overseas?
Sure. So, one thing I would want people to know is not to be afraid of raising a family overseas. We were in our 40s and we had 6 kids. They ranged from, our oldest had just graduated from high school and she went with us. And she took a gap year so that she would know where we were and what we were doing. And then our youngest was going into first grade.
Wow.
So I would tell people not to fear it, that kids are resilient, that our lives, my kids look back fondly on their time in Africa. One time I was speaking and I had my son Joseph with me. He's now 16, but at the time, this was a couple years ago, so he was like 14. And he's one of my adopted sons from Uganda. So people are always like super excited to meet him and, so I did my speaking and then there was time for questions and the host, said, oh, there's time for questions. And one of the people in the audience said, may I ask Joseph a question? And I turned to Joseph and I was like, you care if they ask you a question? And he said, oh, that's fine. And the question they asked him was, what do you miss about living in Africa? Oh. And he paused. And then his answer was, I miss the freedom of living in Africa. Huh. And that was profound because my kids got to experience for that time we lived in Africa, both in Lesotho and in Kenya. They got to experience the freedom of a childhood similar to what I had when I grew up in the mountains in like the 70s and 80s, where I had freedom to play and to roam and to explore and to go and play until it gets dark and then find their way home. It was, in a lot of ways for them, it was quite glorious. There's there were awesome things about it. So it was a grand adventure in many, many ways. When we lived in Kenya, to walk with giraffes and zebra and like to walk by them and see them in the wild. And I mean, there were just magical things and adventure and dirt,
Kids love dirt.
Yeah, they love dirt. They love fire. I think one of the funniest one of the funniest things I caught myself, this was like after we finally were starting to acclimate to living in the village in Lesotho. And of course there's no trash service. We're in the middle of nowhere, and we had a fire pit. We had a pit where we would take our trash and put it in the fire pit. And then I don't remember how often, but we would burn the trash. It was like every other day. And so my younger 2 sons, they were only in 1st and 2nd grade. And I caught myself on this one particular day giving them the trash, sending them outside, handing them matches. I mean, I'm from California. Oh, no. We don't give kids matches. So I caught myself giving them flammable things, sending them out into the yard and with matches and saying, make sure it all burns. That's a kid's dream. So, yeah, that was a funny moment for me. That's one of those signs that I knew, oh, okay, I've gone from foreign to familiar now.
That's awesome.
Who is this Californian lady who's telling her kids to light a fire?
Oh, man. I'm starting to think, man, maybe instead of fearing going overseas and raising a family there, maybe we should encourage people.
It is. When we weren't sure, of course, in the process, you're always asking yourself the question, am I wrecking my kid forever? It doesn't matter what you're doing as a parent. You will always ask yourself that question, am I wrecking them forever? Am I doing the right thing? And we asked ourselves that question too. But for us, what we kept coming back to is we don't want to model disobedience. We don't want to have God telling us to do this and to model for our kids fear or delay or lack of trust or whatever that was to not go. We didn't want to model the contrary. So we set out to do it and to trust God with the cleanup, I guess, and the rest, which I have to still continue to do.